Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the main tactical themes in Arsenal's 4-2 victory over Thomas Tuchel's Chelsea. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Arsenal's pressing, then we'll shift to the impact that Smith Rowe, Odegaard, and Saka had in the final third, and lastly we'll focus on Arteta and Tuchel's adjustments in the second half. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Chelsea starting in a 3-4-1-2 and Arsenal starting in a 3-4-2-1. So as you can see, Arsenal did shift their overall tactical formation to go head-to-head with Chelsea. And from here, what was interesting was their pressing because it did have an effect on this Chelsea build-up play. Initially, what we did end up seeing was that it was Nketiah, Smith Rowe, and Odegaard stepping out towards this Chelsea backline. And then that's when you would expect Tavares and Saka to step forward to close down Alonso and Azpilicueta. But within those opening minutes of that game, we witnessed Mason Mount dropping off into an inside right channel position to get on the ball in his own half. And that ultimately shifted Arteta's approach. Because now what we ended up seeing was that rather than having all three attacking players step towards the Chelsea backline, they were more willing to sag off Sarr, and from there you'd end up seeing Odegaard picking up Kanté, who was dropping off deeper. In those situations now you could see Saka stepping towards Sarr and blocking off the passing lane in towards Alonso, or there were simply times where Saka just simply stuck near Alonso and they allowed Sarr to have the ball because he wasn't looking to play any penetrative or vertical passes. So from there you have Odegaard now sitting on Kanté, Xhaka was stepping towards Loftus-Cheek, and then Elneny can now monitor the movement of Mason Mount. Because initially what you ended up seeing was that the front three was closing the back three, Elneny and Xhaka were stepping towards Kanté and Loftus-Cheek, and that left space for Mount to drop into to help Chelsea progress their play. In this format, when you have Odegaard sitting on Kanté, now you have 3v3 in that midfield zone, Mason Mount's movement can be tracked, and even if Saka's bypassed because Alonso pushes higher up the pitch, that's where you could see White stepping across to close down Alonso because you have Holding and Gabriel who could deal with Lukaku and Werner. There was only one time in that opening half where Arsenal's pressing was bypassed, and that's simply when Odegaard did step out towards the keeper and he wasn't blocking off the passing lane in towards Kanté, and from there Mendy was able to simply bypass him to play the ball into Kanté, who could then carry it into Arsenal's half. Ultimately, this witnessed Arsenal shift into more of a 4-5-1 out of possession, because what you'd see is that Nketiah would stick towards Christensen, Odegaard would sit on Kanté, and then out in those wider areas, Smith Rowe was stepping out towards Reece James to ensure that he couldn't get on the ball. They were still okay with Sarr having possession in Chelsea's half, and then from there Saka would push out to close down Alonso. This leaves Arsenal 3v2 at the back so they could deal with the threat of Lukaku and Werner, but their overall impact was very limited as we didn't see much of Lukaku dropping off deeper to link play with his teammates, and at times we did witness Werner and Alonso swap positions, and that's where Werner would pick up the ball in deeper areas, and then you would end up seeing Saka and White deal with his threat, and then Alonso would push forward into an inside left position, and Holding could simply shift across, and there were times where Elneny even shifted over, and Arsenal had 4v2 in that zone. In a normal situation, Arsenal could still kind of double up on Alonso because then Werner could be closed down by Holding, and you could have Elneny dropping off as well, and in most situations, Elneny was tracking the movement of Mount, Holding, White, and Saka had a 3v2 against Alonso and Werner, and that resulted in Arsenal negating Chelsea's movement and attacking play down that left-hand side. Essentially, when you do look at Chelsea's pressing, at times you did see Lukaku and Werner stepping towards Holding and Gabriel, Alonso would be pushing forward to deal with White, and Mason Mount and Loftus-Cheek would be pushing forward to close down Xhaka and Elneny. That would ultimately mean that Azpilicueta would push forward to deal with Tavares, and in terms of that overall pressing, the issue that Chelsea could encounter was that if Smith Rowe or Odegaard drop off in towards their own half, that now puts onus on the Chelsea wide center backs to step forward to mark them tightly. That leaves Odegaard and Smith Rowe free as outlets for the goalkeeper or the center backs, and ultimately this was the biggest issue with Chelsea's shape, because while Arsenal did end up getting into good areas majorly in transition, what you ended up seeing was that Odegaard and Smith Rowe were always an outlet if Arsenal could get the ball to the outside of Kanté and Loftus-Cheek. From there, Odegaard and Smith Rowe could carry the ball forward, attract pressure towards them. And what we often saw from Odegaard in particular was that he was sliding the ball out towards Saka. And from there, Saka can now get into 1v1s with Alonso, Sarr, or force Conte to shift over. In many of those situations, Saka was able to drag Alonso, Sarr, and Conte towards him, and then funnel the ball back into the path of Odegaard to get into a position where he could create for his teammates. Initially, you have Saka going in a 1v1 with Sarr, and focus on his options that are being blocked out as Alonso and Conte are tracking back and Odegaard's in between them. What Saka does well here is that he cuts across Sarr, and before Conte can step in to make a challenge, he looks to slide the ball across him into the path of Odegaard ahead of Christensen. When Odegaard does receive the ball, look at his options to his left. He has Tavares and Nketiah occupying Azpilicueta and James, and Loftus-Cheek once again is ball watching, so now you have Smith Rowe making a free run towards the edge of the box, and Odegaard simply squares the ball across Loftus-Cheek, and from that position, before any Chelsea defenders can step towards him, Smith Rowe curls a first-time effort beyond the keeper. In this example, you witness Saka in a 1v3 with Werner tracking back and Sarr behind Alonso, and you see Odegaard and Nketiah following the play. Once Saka gets through Alonso and Werner, he looks to drop the ball off into the path of Odegaard, who's to the right of Conte, and from there he's able to receive the ball freely. When Odegaard receives the ball, he's able to let it roll across his body, and Conte doesn't get tight towards him, and you can see that Loftus-Cheek isn't tracking the movement of Smith Rowe, and you have Tavares ahead of Azpilicueta. So when Odegaard plays the ball into the path of Smith Rowe, James does well to step towards him, but that's where you see Xhaka preparing to step towards the penalty area, and Loftus-Cheek is ball watching. Smith Rowe drops the ball off into the path of Xhaka, and from this position he can either slide the ball out to his left wing back or take a shot on goal, and from here his effort on goal is blocked, but you're able to see the position that Smith Rowe is able to place him into, and that's a legitimate goal scoring position. And then in this last example, you have Saka in a 1v1 with Alonso, and you can see that Sarr and Conte are shifting across to provide cover and make it a 1v3. And when Saka looks to cut central, you could see that Conte and Sarr looking to block off any passing lanes or the pass back into the path of Odegaard. Saka does well here to anticipate that, and he opts to nutmeg Alonso and carry the ball into right half space. And over at the far post, you could see Smith Rowe and Tavares are occupying James and Azpilicueta. So if Saka does drag away Sarr, that leaves Nketiah in a 1v1 with Christensen. When Saka carries the ball towards the byline, you can see that Christensen gets caught looking to cover the 6-yard area. So Saka looks to pull the ball back into the vacant space for Nketiah, but with Conte and Azpilicueta stepping quickly, Nketiah has to hit a first-time scuffed effort wide of the net. If Nketiah wasn't successfully dropping off deeper to link play with his teammates, he was making runs across the center backs and looking to drag Christensen out of position. And then from there, what you'd end up seeing was that Tavares would have a free outlet because Mason Mount would be forced to shift across. And from there, he could occupy Azpilicueta, and then that would leave Smith Rowe free to make runs off Loftus-Cheek. And from there, Reece James would have to step forward to apply pressure. And if he didn't, then he'd have to monitor the movement of Smith Rowe making runs towards the box. And many of these situations, you'd end up seeing Nketiah looking to position himself between James and Christensen, or specifically looking to isolate James with Tavares pushing forward to occupy Azpilicueta. And then that would now put onus on Loftus-Cheek to track the movement of Smith Rowe making runs off of him. So essentially you have situations where Saka's getting into 1v1 with Alonso and beating him. If not, it would be forcing Sarr to shift across. And if he was dragging 2 or 3 defenders towards him, he had an outlet in Odegaard and Smith Rowe, and then they were able to combine in the final third. On the opposite flank, the other threat that Arsenal could pose was that Smith Rowe would receive the ball on the outside of Loftus-Cheek, and in situations you end up seeing Azpilicueta and James being dragged towards the ball, and from there Smith Rowe could drop the ball off to Xhaka, he can link play with Tavares, or look to find Nketiah and Odegaard in space in the final third. Ultimately, Arsenal's downfall in that opening half was that they made mistakes in their own third that resulted in Chelsea getting into legitimate goal scoring positions. And the same thing can be applied towards Chelsea, where Christensen made a mistake that allowed Nketiah to break free to put Arsenal ahead. But in terms of the second half, we witnessed both managers looking to adjust. Thiago Silva came on for Christensen, and that was to provide more protection ahead of Mendy because Christensen struggled against Nketiah. Tuchel also eventually turned towards Havertz to replace Lukaku, and Havertz did a much better job of dropping off in towards the midfield zone, looking to link play with his teammates. But in those situations, you witness Gabriel often tracking his movement, ensuring that there was pressure applied towards him when he dropped off into that midfield zone. And if he looked to push higher up the pitch, that would simply see Holding step towards him. And then it was often Gabriel monitoring the movement of Mason Mount dropping off into that zone. Because Werner was now looking to occupy those gaps between Holding and White. And he was looking to make runs in behind, but White was capable of tracking his movement. The initial adjustment that we witnessed from Arteta was now Odegaard was helping Nketiah and Smith Rowe press the Chelsea back three. And Odegaard was blocking off the passing lane in towards Conte and now stepping towards Sarr. That would see Saka pushing forward to deal with Alonso. And now Mason Mount was looking to drop off into the midfield zone. But even in those situations, he was being tracked by Elneny, or White would step forward to apply tight pressure. With Chelsea looking to peg back Arsenal in that half, now we ended up seeing Arsenal's 4-5-1 shift into more of a 5-4-1 with Saka tracking the movement of Alonso, who was pushing into advanced positions in the final third. Chelsea were now more of a 3-2-5 with the two forwards occupying the gaps and Mount looking to find space in between the lines, and then eventually swapping positions with Havertz when Havertz looks to drop off into that deeper zone. And from there, Saka did a very good job of tracking the movement of Alonso, and it eventually led to some substitutions from Arteta. You ended up seeing Martinelli lead the line as Arteta was looking for pace into those gaps of space behind the wingbacks, because eventually we did see Reece James swap with Azpilicueta, and the goal there for Tuchel was to try and get James to exploit Nuno Tavares' inability to defend at a high level. So with James now looking to push forward to exploit Tavares, Arteta ended up sacrificing Smith Rowe and bringing on Cedric to play in that right wing back role to deal with Alonso, and then Saka moved out to the left channel, and from there now you had more pace in your attack with Saka now looking to exploit space behind James. And as the game fizzled out, Arsenal's 5-4-1 negated Chelsea's overall attacking threat in open play, and coincidentally Saka got himself into a position where he was able to win a penalty that helped Arsenal claim all 3 points. So as you can see, while Arsenal benefited from some poor decision-making from Chelsea's backline, Arteta deserves credit for the system alteration that stifled Tuchel's attack in open play and created issues for the hosts when they progressed play into the final third.